Good morning, Mr. Osbourne.
Don't call me Mr. fucking Osbourne.
Okay, I'll call you Ozzy.
Ozzy Osbourne once claimed he'd trade his solo fame to have been in this iconic band. Stay tuned to find out who. In this video, we'll reveal Ozzy Osbourne's favorite bands of all time, uncovering surprising picks, controversial opinions, and an unexpected confession from the Prince of Darkness himself. Think you know Ozzy's music taste? Comment your guess now. Which band do you think influenced him most? Number 1. The Beatles. Who would have guessed that the Prince of Darkness fell in love with pop harmonies before he ever screamed into a mic? But for Ozzy Osbourne, the Beatles weren't just a band. They were the ignition switch for everything that followed. He's often said that the first time he heard "She Loves You" on the radio, it was like God entered his soul. It wasn't heavy metal, but it moved him in a way nothing else ever had. Ozzy was just a working-class kid from Birmingham when Beatlemania swept across England. But he wasn't screaming in the streets. He was locked in his room, listening. Over and over, that early obsession set him on a collision course with destiny. He's admitted he never thought of being famous or wealthy. He just wanted to be them. The Beatles were proof that working-class boys could rule the world with a song. He credits Paul McCartney and John Lennon as the first songwriters who truly made him understand emotion through melody. Ozzy has even said that without the Beatles, there would be no Black Sabbath, no solo career, and no Ozzy as we know him. And the fandom never faded. In fact, in recent years, Ozzy covered John Lennon's How, a haunting, melancholic track that reveals just how deeply he connected to Lennon's introspection. Even decades into his own career, Ozzy still looks up to those four mop-haired lads from Liverpool. Number 2. Black Sabbath. It's easy to forget that Ozzy Osbourne was once just a frontman of a new, untested band from Birmingham. But when Black Sabbath formed in 1968, something otherworldly happened. The band wasn't just playing music, they were conjuring sound that felt like doom, dread, and prophecy rolled into a thunderous guitar riff. But behind the darkness was love. Ozzy has consistently praised the original Sabbath lineup. Tony Iommi's haunting guitar tone, Geezer Butler's apocalyptic lyrics, and Bill Ward's primal drumming. He often refers to them as brothers, even when things turned sour. "We had a magic," he said. "There's no other word for it." The chemistry between the four was so raw and intuitive that even Ozzy admitted they couldn't replicate it after their breakup. He's called the first 6 Sabbath albums the real deal, a body of work he still considers the foundation of heavy metal. That deep admiration never faded, even during public fallouts and messy reunions. In interviews, Ozzy's voice softens when he talks about those early Sabbath days. He recalls rehearsing in dingy factories and writing Paranoid in minutes. "We didn't know what we were doing," he said, "but it felt right." And millions of fans agreed. Despite his later solo success, Ozzy has never shied away from saying Black Sabbath was lightning in a bottle, and he was lucky to be part of it. That wasn't a band. That was fate. Number 3. Led Zeppelin. What happens when a band is so good, even your idols worship them? That's Led Zeppelin in Ozzy Osbourne's world. He's called them the ultimate rock band, and not in a casual throwaway way. For Ozzy, Zeppelin wasn't just music, it was religion. He grew up watching them rewrite the rules of rock, and he soaked up every minute of it. Ozzy was particularly obsessed with Robert Plant's voice. He could scream like a banshee and then whisper like a ghost, he once said. And don't even get him started on John Bonham. Ozzy called him the greatest drummer who ever lived. Not one of the greatest, the greatest. That's not a small compliment from a guy who played with Bill Ward. In the late 60s and early 70s, Sabbath and Zeppelin often orbited the same sonic universe. And while Sabbath leaned into the darkness, Zeppelin explored the mystical, the romantic, and the chaotic. Ozzy has said that watching Zeppelin live made him realize the power of presence, how one band could control thousands of people with just a single chord. He's also confessed to a bit of envy, wishing Sabbath had the same level of polish and mystique. But it was never resentment. It was awe. He knew he was witnessing something singular. "They were untouchable," he said. "Nobody came close. Not us. Not anyone." And perhaps most telling of all, Ozzy once admitted that if he could join any other band in history, it would have been Led Zeppelin. Number 4. AC/DC. Ozzy Osbourne loves a good punch in the face, musically speaking, and no band delivered it better than AC/DC. From the first time he heard High Voltage, Ozzy knew these guys weren't messing around. Their stripped down, raw, and absolutely unrelenting sound earned his admiration instantly. "They just come out and go," he once said. "No nonsense, just power." What made AC/DC stand out to Ozzy wasn't just their thunderous riffs or unforgettable hooks, it was their attitude. Bon Scott, in particular, struck a chord. Ozzy described him as a rock star's rock star. Swagger, danger, and wit all wrapped in denim. When Scott tragically passed, Ozzy was genuinely devastated. But even then, he praised the band's ability to push forward with Brian Johnson, delivering Back in Black, one of the greatest rock albums of all time. He admired their consistency. Where other bands bent to trends, AC/DC stood firm. They didn't try to be anything but themselves, Ozzy noted. That takes guts. And guts, as we all know, is something Ozzy deeply respects. In the early 80s, the two bands would often cross paths during massive tours and festivals. Despite Ozzy's theatrical flair and AC/DC's no-frills punch, there was mutual respect and plenty of backstage chaos. It was more than admiration. It was shared DNA. AC/DC proved to Ozzy that you don't need complexity to achieve greatness. You need conviction. You need a riff that hits like a truck. And you need to believe in every note you play. Number 5. The Rolling Stones. Now, Ozzy might be called the Prince of Darkness, but when it comes to rock royalty, even he bows to the Rolling Stones. He's never been shy about calling Mick Jagger the hardest working frontman in history. It wasn't just the music, it was the legacy, the showmanship, the aura that captivated him. Ozzy grew up idolizing the Stones before he ever picked up a microphone. Their raw, blues-soaked swagger shaped his vision of what rock should feel like. He once said that listening to Sympathy for the Devil made him want to wear leather, get loud, and cause trouble. Sounds familiar, right? But it wasn't just the sound, it was the staying power. Ozzy has often marveled at how the Stones kept evolving, adapting without ever really changing who they were. They went through every era and still stayed the Stones. He said, "That's impossible, but they did it." During the 80s, when Ozzy was blazing through his solo career and the Stones were pushing through another reinvention, he frequently cited them as his blueprint for longevity. "I want to be 70 and still tearing it up like Jagger," he once joked. Well, guess what? He wasn't joking. In Ozzy's world, respect isn't given, it's earned. And the Rolling Stones earned it 10 times over. For him, they proved that rock doesn't age. It just gets louder, looser, and more legendary. Number 6. Metallica. You might expect Ozzy to keep the throne to himself, but instead, he offered a hand up. That's exactly what happened in 1986, when he took a scrappy young thrash band called Metallica on tour as his opening act. And what did he see in them? Fire. Ozzy immediately recognized that they had what it took to dominate. He praised James Hetfield's ferocity on stage and Lars Ulrich's relentless energy. They reminded me of Sabbath in the early days. Ozzy said, hungry, angry, focused, and he meant it as the highest compliment. He didn't just admire Metallica's music, he admired their mindset. During the tour, there were some classic Ozzy antics, sure, but he kept a close eye on the band. He was impressed by how Metallica stayed grounded while delivering face-melting performances night after night. They didn't fake anything, he said. It was all real. What stood out most to Ozzy was Metallica's refusal to chase trends. Even as they grew into stadium-sized monsters, they stayed loyal to their identity. They evolved, but on their terms, he said. That's rare. Years later, Ozzy would continue to praise Metallica's role in keeping heavy metal relevant through decades of shifting tastes. And when Metallica entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you better believe Ozzy was cheering from the sidelines. Number 7. The Who. What happens when chaos becomes choreography? That's what Ozzy saw in The Who, a band that turned musical mayhem into pure electricity. Ozzy didn't just admire their talent, he revered their madness. He once said The Who felt like a bomb going off in a music store. And he meant that as praise of the highest order. For Ozzy, it wasn't just about Pete Townshend's windmill guitar slashes or Roger Daltrey's primal vocals. It was Keith Moon, Moon was a lunatic. Ozzy laughed. But he was a brilliant lunatic. The Who's destructive energy mirrored the kind of wild unpredictability Ozzy craved and embodied. He often recalled watching The Who live and being stunned by their ability to destroy their instruments and still sound better than half the bands out there. They were anarchists with talent, Ozzy said, and that's a rare combo. In interviews, he talked about how The Who made it okay to be messy, loud, and emotionally volatile on stage. That wasn't a bug, it was the point. Their music didn't just entertain, it exploded off the stage and into your bloodstream. Ozzy loved them because they weren't clean. They weren't perfect, but they were real, and that authenticity mattered more to him than polish or perfection ever could. Number 8. Jimi Hendrix. Some guitarists play like they're on fire. Jimi Hendrix was the fire. And for Ozzy Osbourne, Hendrix wasn't just a guitarist, he was a mythical force. Ozzy has described hearing Purple Haze for the first time as being abducted by aliens through my ears. That's how powerful it was. He wasn't alone. Like many young British rockers in the late 60s, Ozzy saw Hendrix as a being from another planet, someone who rewrote the rules of music without even trying. But what stuck with Ozzy wasn't just the technical wizardry, it was the emotion. Hendrix made his guitar sing, scream, and cry, often in the same solo. Ozzy admired that deeply. He could say more with one note than some guys say in a whole album. He once remarked, that idea of music as pure expression left a permanent mark on Ozzy's own vocal style. Even in Sabbath's heaviest moments, you can hear that emotional undercurrent Hendrix helped awaken in him. Later in his career, Ozzy paid homage with fiery Hendrix covers and tributes, making it clear that the influence had never faded. He even said that if he could resurrect one artist just to jam with, it would be Jimi. Hendrix showed Ozzy what it meant to break boundaries, to be unchained, to be legendary. Number 9. Motorhead. If Ozzy Osbourne is the Prince of Darkness, then Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead was his battle-worn brother-in-arms. Their friendship ran deep, filled with loud music, late nights, and legendary chaos. But beyond the partying, Ozzy had nothing but profound respect for what Motorhead stood for. No compromise. Ever. Ozzy often said Lemmy was the smartest guy in the dumbest clothes. That may sound like a jab, but it was pure affection. He revered Lemmy's lyrics, raw, poetic, and unapologetically real. He even called Lemmy a Shakespeare of the dirty streets. Coming from Ozzy, that's huge. Their connection wasn't just personal, it was musical. Motorhead's sound was fast, furious, and brutally honest. It was everything Ozzy loved, stripped of pretense and packed with heart. They didn't care about trends or critics, he said. They cared about truth. Ozzy and Lemmy even collaborated on songs like Mama, I'm Coming Home, which Lemmy co-wrote. And when Lemmy passed, Ozzy didn't just mourn a friend. He mourned the last of a dying breed. Lemmy was the real deal, he said. There will never be another. What made Ozzy love Motorhead wasn't just the speed or the volume. It was the authenticity. They were a middle finger to the manufactured and the fake. And that's a language Ozzy speaks fluently. Number 10. Queen. Ozzy Osbourne doesn't hand out compliments easily. But when it comes to Queen, he gets downright reverent. He's called Freddie Mercury, the greatest frontman of all time. And he meant every syllable. Queen wasn't just a band to Ozzy, they were a phenomenon. He marveled at their versatility. One minute it was operatic grandeur, the next, straight-up rock mayhem. Ozzy admired how they bent genres without ever breaking their identity. From Bohemian Rhapsody to Stone Cold Crazy, Queen showed him that risk could be its own reward. They could do anything, Ozzy once said. And they did. What struck him most was their theatricality. As someone who bit the head off a bat for shock value, Ozzy still bowed to Queen's ability to dazzle. He said their live shows were like Broadway on steroids, and Freddie's control of a stadium crowd? Terrifying, in the best way. Backstage at festivals, Ozzy would often observe how tight Queen was, both musically and personally. He respected how they kept internal drama out of the spotlight and focused on their craft. They were a machine, he said, but a beautiful one. Years after Freddie's passing, Ozzy continued to honor him. He performed tributes, praised his songwriting, and once said, Freddie's voice could hit notes that only angels hear. So there you have it, the bands that shaped the Prince of Darkness himself. From the poetic chaos of Hendrix to the thunder of AC/DC, Ozzy's inspirations are as iconic as his legacy. If you thought you knew Ozzy, think again, because behind every wild rocker is a library of legends. Subscribe for more untold stories from the gods of rock. And remember, greatness doesn't just come from within, it comes from who you listen to.